So in CSE 235, you're going to create virtual systems on your own laptop, and you're going to create virtual systems online. And the process for either approach is the same once you get on the screen. If we were creating a virtual system on our laptop, we would want to make sure that there's adequate disk space. You'll see here that this is a problem. So if you start on the local system and want to use the standard edition of Microsoft Server 2019 for a virtual system, you want to make sure that you have enough disk space locally. And in general, you'd want to have about 40 gigabytes of disk space. If you install a Linux virtual system, which is similar to Windows, except it's free, you can get away with a much smaller installation. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate with Linux a local installation of a virtual system. And then when we get online, I'll use standard or data center install to show you how to do it in the cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and here and make sure, yes, I have this. So it's also good to empty recycle bins, and that's one reason why we had you optimize your personal technology so you could recover some space. First thing you're going to do is log in with an administrative account so that you can right-click it with your mouse and then run as administrator to start VirtualBox. And here you see I have a number of different local virtual systems installed, but I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to use the new option, and I will call this Test Linux. The moment I type in the word Linux, you see that it changed here to type Linux. And it doesn't know which kind of Linux I'm using, so it's just going to use a generic Linux. It sees the word Linux. If I were to go ahead and put test Ubuntu, it would know, okay, that's Linux, and I also have Ubuntu 64-bit. If your screen doesn't change, make sure that you change the type to Linux, and you select the Ubuntu 64-bit if you downloaded that for a Linux distribution to create a virtual system with. In the case that we're creating our standard server, you would basically select Windows, and then you would scroll down and choose Windows 2019. That's what you would do if we were using the data center or standard download, and you'll see that in just a minute. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this, and I'll select Next. It's usually a good idea to give 2 or more gigabytes of RAM if your laptop has it. So if you have at least 4 gigs of RAM and you close all your applications, you can safely put 2048 megabytes to allow the virtual machine to have 2 gigs of RAM. So we're running a virtual laptop with another laptop, a physical laptop. I'm going to create a virtual hard disk. So just like we need to have RAM, we need to have input and output, permanent storage. That's a hard disk. We're going to create a virtual hard disk. I'm going to accept the 10 gigabyte size recommendation, and I'm going to allow the VirtualBox disk image type. If I used VHD, I could take that virtual hard disk and plug it onto a USB, transfer it to another machine and run it with VMware or with Hyper-V, or I could save it and use it with the VMware format type, which is VMDK, virtual machine disk. I'm going to leave it the way it is. In general, if you use dynamically allocated physical hard disk space, it's going to expand up to 10 gigabytes as it's needed. And that's going to cause a performance drop because it's building out the hard disk as it's being used. If you want better performance with your virtual system, you should choose fixed size, but that's going to take up 10 gigabytes of space immediately as soon as you set up the rest of your virtual machine. So I'm going to leave the size to be 10 gigs. And on a laptop with multi-core processor and 8 or more gigs of RAM and a solid-state hard drive, you see it doesn't take very long at all to build the virtual hard disk and the virtual system locally. Once again, if you're doing standard edition of Windows Server 2019, you're going to want to choose a fixed 40 gigabyte, and you'll probably want to put 4096 for RAM because it's a server operating system. You'll get a chance to see that in a minute. Are there any questions while we're waiting for the virtual hard disk to be built?
No.
Has anyone heard of Linux or Ubuntu?
Yeah, I've used it before.
Okay. That's a great way to try some things out, and you don't have to worry about licensing because it's free to the public, and that's one advantage of using Linux. So online, when you're building your cloud-based virtual system with data center, you're going to be given a login and a password. We'll come back to that in a second. Let's finish this screen. So here are the components that have been built with VirtualBox. There's a general system components, and then like the system board or motherboard, what we'd call the motherboard, which has the RAM. There's a display adapter. It's like a VGA card that allows the display to show graphics. You see here it's only using 16 megabytes. We're going to change that. We have 2 disks, not just one. We have a hard disk, but then we also have a virtual DVD drive, and we're going to put something in that in just a second. We have an audio card. We have a USB connection. We have shared folders so we can move files in and out of the virtual machine, and we have a network interface. I'm going to change some settings to make sure it plays nice elsewhere. In the system option, I'm going to uncheck the floppy disk option because, well, we don't have a floppy disk connected to my laptop. You can't virtualize what you don't have. There's no point in having a floppy disk checked. I'm going to increase the processor count to 2 CPUs if I have any to spare, and you see here I have 4 CPU cores, so I'm going to use 2 of them for this. And that's what I'm going to do on the system option. Any questions about our system options?
Nope.
Okay, for display, I'm going to increase the amount of memory that's allowed for the display so I have better resolution, better graphics. And I'm going to use the VMS VGA, and I'll check the box to use the graphics controller in my laptop so I get better performance. Any questions about the changes for the display component of the virtual system? Hearing none. Storage. I have an empty DVD drive. but I downloaded the image file to install it. And if I burned it to a physical plastic DVD disc, I could stick that disc in the physical CD or DVD drive tray. To do that locally, I'm going to check the box because it's a live DVD distribution. We'll explain what that means in just a minute. And we're going to choose the image file that we're using. I'm going to use version 20, the latest version of the Ubuntu Linux distribution. And so now it's ready to go. If I start the machine, it's going to look in this DVD drive to see if there's anything in there, and it'll interpret the image file here as if it were a plastic disc. Any questions about the change I've made for the disk tray in storage? All right, hearing none, I'm going to go to network. Instead of using network address translation, your internet address is translated into a private, local, non-routable network address. A lot of wireless routers and access points, your Wi-Fi, your household Wi-Fi, does NAT already. If I leave this on NAT, I'm going to have NAT happening with the virtual system, and then NAT with the wireless. I'm going to have a condition called double NATing. Creates all sorts of problems when I'm running games or doing things on the network. I'm going to change this instead to bridged, which means that the virtual network card is going to behave just like a physical real card, and it's going to take up a network address space in the environment, and it's going to act and work just like a regular Wi-Fi card. For serial ports, I'm not worried about that. For USB, I'm not really worried about that. I want to be forwards and backwards compatible with different kinds. I do want to share a folder with my virtual machine. I have a temp folder on my C drive. And sometimes I store things in there. So I'm going to go ahead. Oh, I have a lot in there. I'm going to store something in the temp that I can reference inside the virtual system. So I'm going to list my C colon. If I click temp, and then click up here, the path is C:\temp. That's the disk and the directory. That's what I'm going to put inside here for my shared folder. My folder path, I'll choose other, and this PC, my C drive, and my temp folder. You'll see C:\temp. I'm going to make it read-only, which means that the virtual system can read what's in there, but it can't change anything that's in there. And I'm going to connect it automatically when I start the system. I'll say OK. I'll do one more thing just to make life easy. In the General tab, under Advanced, I'm going to allow sharing of memory between the physical host and the virtual system so that I can drag and drop things in between the windows, either into the virtual system or out of the virtual system. So I'm going to make the clipboard, when you copy and paste, there's a space in memory, in RAM memory, called the clipboard. I'm going to make the memory allocation used for copying and pasting, I'll make that bidirectional, and I'll be able to drag and drop with my mouse in either direction, to or from the host machine and virtual machine. Are there any questions about the general settings and shared folders or the networking?
No.
Okay. So at this point, I'm going to start. And when I start the virtual machine, all it has are the virtual hardware components. It's going to prompt me which startup disk do I want to use. You see here that I have the ISO that was downloaded the other day I'm going to use, because I'm limited in disk space, I'm going to go ahead and use the 20, version 20 of Ubuntu. I'll go ahead and start this. And right away, you'll see a notice here about capturing the keyboard. So what that means is that if you click into this window, whatever you type is going to be happening inside the virtual system. Most of these are just general information, they're notifications. You'll see with the 20th version of Ubuntu, it does some things to check the files to see that the files are working right. I'm going to clear out these notifications and go full screen, just so there's a little less, it's a little less busy. So the disk, the image file in the disk tray is what's loading now. I have an empty hard drive on my virtual system, a 10 gig hard drive. And you see Ubuntu is loading the first screen. When the first screen comes up, it's going to give me an option to try Ubuntu without actually installing it to the hard disk. That's called a live distribution, or a live CD, a live DVD. It means I don't have to install it on my hard drive. I can use Linux without installing it on my hard drive. It's a very cool feature. So in just a minute, you're going to see the install option asks if I want to try Ubuntu without making any changes to the computer, or if I'm ready to install it on my computer. We're going to install Ubuntu. We're going to install Linux. We'll accept the English version here. We're going to leave the options for install unchanged because we want to just accept the default ones. Although, since I'm limited in driver space, disk drive space on the host, my hard drive on the laptop's getting kind of tight. Instead of loading Office software and games and media players, I'm just going to use the web browser and basic utilities. So this is a nice option if you want to keep the footprint down. It really doesn't have that much effect, to be honest, because I chose a fixed 10 gig hard drive space. And if I load all the rest of this in that 10 gigs, or I only load a little bit in the 10 gigs, the only difference is that I don't have installed Office software. I just want you to be aware that if you had a dynamically sized hard drive and selected minimal installation, you could get by with very little disk space. And that's one cool thing about Linux. I'm going to go ahead and click normal installation, just because I'm a glutton for punishment. I'll click continue. And at this point, it's likely to ask me, now, on your laptop, on your host, depending on the physical CPU size, the number of cores, the physical memory available to your laptop, this may go faster or slower. You'll notice the installation type is asking, should we erase the disk and install Ubuntu or something else? So you can actually resize the partitions or change them if you want. We're just going to accept the default values, and we're not erasing the disk of the laptop, the physical laptop. We are only erasing the 10 gig virtual hard disk. So for those of you that are getting a little nervous right now, understand this screen means, do we want to erase the hard disk, the virtual hard disk we just created? We're going to install now and accept that. And at this point, it's going to ask us about the default partitions. We'll accept those and continue, and away we go. Oh, it's also going to ask what time zone we're in. And this is very important. You're going to want to remember the computer name and your name. So I'm going to use my first initial and last name. And I'm going to change the computer name so that it's a little more specific. I'm going to say this is my Ubu20 VM in all caps. If I typed in my name and made it official like this, I could make my name pretty and say Timothy Kentop, and then the username could still be T Kentop. And that's kind of nice. So when the screen comes up, it'll say Timothy Kentop, but the username behind that is T Kentop. I want to use a password that isn't the same as the username. I want to use a password that's fairly complex because this password is going to protect root access or administrative privileges on that virtual system. So I don't want it to be too easy to guess. I'm going to put in something that I will never forget. I'm going to make it upper and lower case. I'm going to include numbers and symbols. And I'm going to make sure it matches. I'm not going to log in automatically with it. I'm going to require the password to log in. It's another safeguard in case you get hacked. Any questions about setting up the credentials, the names for the account, and the computer name, and the password, and then the login option before we continue? Are we good? Victor?
Yeah, good.
Aaron? Robert?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. We're going to continue. Similar process for standard edition. You'll see in a minute how that works. And it'll be the same that you use on your laptop. If you're running low on space on your laptop, you're welcome to do the Linux installation you're seeing here on your laptop for your solution. For the local virtual machine setup, you can use dynamic instead of fixed hard disk space, and you can use the minimal installation if that helps. Now this is going to take a while, so what I'm going to do at this point is pause the recording just briefly. Let's see. Let's see if we can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So we'll pause the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and resume recording, and I'll check on the progress of our install. So here it says the installation is complete. When I click restart now, something weird's going to happen. It's going to reboot, but because it just loaded from an image file, it's going to attempt to reload once again by pulling from the image file. Quite often you get an error message that says, hey, remove the installation medium and then press enter. So in order to do that, I'm going to open my VirtualBox Manager console. I'm going to go into the settings again. I'm going to select storage, the disk image or image file in the tray. I'm going to select the icon to the right, and I'm going to remove the disk from the virtual drive. When I click OK, now I can minimize this screen, and the trick is to click back into the window and then press enter. If I press enter now, if this is not the active window, the enter will hit something else on the desktop. So I want to click on this and then hit enter. And here goes our Ubuntu installation. You might see some error messages. Everybody's hardware is different. But what you'll find once you get into this, you can adjust the size of your desktop. When you install this on a laptop or a PC, it takes up the whole screen, of course, and you get the same high resolution. You'll notice that my full name, the way I spelled it, is showing. And if I click on this, then it's going to let me in. And up here in the upper left corner, I can usually adjust my window size, except that VirtualBox provides something called guest additions. These are extensions to VirtualBox that have drivers. So one of the things I want to do, I want to skip this screen. And let's see. Don't send system information. I don't want a lot of stuff going on. Do I want location privacy? I don't want to turn on location services. I don't want people knowing who I am or what I'm doing. And we're ready to go. So I'm going to click done. You see it can do Skype, Spotify, all sorts of cool stuff, hacking tools. You have office tools. You have a web browser, an email client. You have a media player. You have Office applications, just like Office. A writer is like Word. You can install other applications by clicking here, but one of the things I would rather do, this is really important. So you want to be able to update, and so you want to click install now, and that's really important to do. But before I do that, I want the best performance from my hardware. You'll notice the resolution here on the screen is good, but I don't know if I can go full screen. So what I'm going to do is, using the device option, I'm going to insert the guest addition. Once again, all right, and it says it contains software intended to be automatically started. Would you like to run it? I'm going to answer yes, run. It's going to ask for my password because it's going to install stuff. So I'm going to put in my password. And authenticate this. And now it's loading the VirtualBox extension drivers. That's going to allow the virtual machine to make the best use of my graphics controller on the host machine, the physical laptop equipment, the network cards, the sound card, the network Wi-Fi cards, everything is going to run better as soon as this loads. So it says this system is currently not set up to build kernel modules. Please install the GCC. Make Perl packages from your distribution. Running kernel modules will not be replaced until the system is restarted. Press return to close this window. So I'm going to restart this. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. I could run this update, but I want what I just did to take effect. So I'm going to say remind me later. Now I'm going to go out into the upper right corner. I'm going to hit power off and then power off and use the restart option. Any questions on installing the extension pack or guest additions for your virtual system? It's one of the very first things you want to do. The next thing we want to do after it restarts is run updates. So there's lots of patches and fixes and security improvements. So once I get in here, I'm going to do this one of two ways. I can use the graphical user environment. Let's see if I can view this better. I want to go full screen. It says I want to use the host key with the letter F to go into and out of full screen. That's really important to understand. The host key is currently defined as the right control key on my laptop keyboard. So I have to remember the right control key plus F is going to get me in and out of this. I'm not going to check that box because I want to see that message again in case I get in trouble. Oh yeah, can everybody see this?
Yep.
I'm full screen. and I'm running a laptop with Linux that's actually operating inside my physical hardware host, my physical machine, my physical laptop. I can browse the web, can watch YouTube videos, all that. What do I do to update? Simplest way to update is using commands. So in Linux, there are some commands that are useful, but you can also go into the Ubuntu software. And usually in Ubuntu software, as long as you're connected through your host Wi-Fi, you're also connected to the other. It's downloading the software catalog, and there should be an option to update somewhere on the screen. If there isn't, another cool option is to click here on Show Applications, and then I type to search for terminal. This is going to give me a command prompt. I don't have administrative privileges to run the commands I'd like to run next. That's what the $sign means. The $sign prompt is the average user prompt. And here you see that T. Kentop is logged in at Ubu 20 VM. So the name of my machine is showing here at my login prompt. Remember, that's a useful reference. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to issue a command to go into administrative or root mode called sudo su. I have to put in my password again. And now it gives me a reference to the directory I'm in, and it gives me the pound prompt, which means I have root access. So now I can get in here and do what I need to do with each of the commands. It's considered best practice to use the sudo command, and then you put in a password each time you run a command. And then that way, if something goes haywire, it's not going to hose the rest of your machine. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type in, I'm going to update my my application and utilities inventory with a command called apt-get, apt-get update. And then I'm going to go ahead and use two ampersands. After it's updated, I'm going to upgrade. So if it finds any new versions, that's what the first part's going to do, and then the second part, upgrade, is going to kick it off. You see here, it's getting a whole series of updates. It says, hey, there's 3 megabytes of additional disk space will be used. Well, that's pretty trivial. I'm going to say yes. Now it's getting the packages, it's loading the updates, and this is going to be pretty quick. Are there any questions about how to get started, how to adjust your viewing real estate, how to get into the terminal, how to elevate your privileges to root, to the pound prompt, and how to manually update with a command the software that's loaded on your virtual system? Same or similar process is going to be used when you install standard server. How do you feel about reviewing the server setup in our class on Monday?
I'm okay with it.
Would you like to try downloading Linux and installing a Linux virtual system locally, like we've shown you, between now and Monday? 10 gigs, just like we did. What do you say?
I'm okay with it.
What do you think, Robert?
I don't think Robert's here anymore.
Okay. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, go through.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and press my right control key and then F. And that's going to give me my screen back. This is going to keep running. When it finishes, I'm going to restart my system and run updates again until it says, hey, I don't have any more. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording then.